All right, folks, we'll get started. It's 12:02, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I want to say first, thank you for taking the time to attend the first webinar, I believe, provided by the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology, Crafting Your Sociological Brand. I am Gary David, the presenter, PhD and certified clinical sociologist, which I'll mention something about. I'm at Bentley University, which is located just outside of Boston. I'm also the primary person involved in my consultancy called Ethnoanalytics, and I'll talk a little bit about those things too, especially in relation to the idea of how do we craft our brand as sociologists. And right now, I believe everyone is muted, but you can communicate with me and the other attendees through the Zoom webinar chat box, which I know some of you have already done. So if you have any questions, feel free to post your questions there, and I'll try to get to them. And if I can't get to them during the webinar, I'll make sure to try to reach out to you individually and or as a group to carry on this, what I consider vitally important topic of conversation for those of us who are sociologists, those of us who are aspiring sociologists, and those who always seem confounded by how do we communicate what it is we do with those people who we regularly interact. And so this webinar is sponsored by Bentley University because they're providing me with the laptop and the Zoom account through which I am doing this, the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology, and also my consultancy, Ethnoanalytics. And I really want to thank the AACS for being the impetus behind this idea. As we'll talk about, one of the initiatives that I've tried to lead along with other people in the organization is more professional development opportunities to really try to provide people with those skills they need to be practicing sociologists, whether applied or clinical, which I'll talk about the difference between those two things in one moment. A little bit about Bentley and about my journey to this moment right now of talking to y'all out there. Bentley's a private business university located outside of Boston. And if you would have talked to me when I was an undergraduate or graduate student and told me that I'd be working at a business school for my career, I would have thought you were out of your mind. I used to actively avoid walking through the business school at my undergraduate institution because I was so adverse to the idea of business. But luckily, in coming to Bentley, I've been able to explore and understand what the variety of things business can mean, and also what value sociology can add to the kinds of work that people engage in and around business. And Bentley was founded as a school focusing on accounting and finance, but more recently, there's a really heavy emphasis on the integration and fusion of arts and sciences with business and vice versa. So it provides a really nice proving ground for talking about how sociology in particular, or arts and sciences in general, can really impact and shape business. And I will say now, after 19 years here, I do wish as an undergraduate or graduate student, I would have had some classes in things like branding, marketing, project management, reading financial statements, all these things I've had to learn and had the opportunity to learn through my time here at Bentley that I just never covered as a graduate student or undergraduate student. And as we'll talk about, it's one of the big gaps in our branding is the inability to understand the people with whom we're speaking and to really be able to communicate in terms that make sense to them. And a little plug for AACS. And if you're not members of AACS, I highly recommend you do become a member. I am the immediate past president of the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology. You can see our web address at aacsnet.net, and there's membership information there. I will say that I am recording this webinar and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel, our Applied You YouTube channel. And we are undergoing a major redesign of the website in order to bring the resources and information that you need, whether you're members or not, to really drive and articulate the value of applied and clinical sociology and give you the skills you need to do the work that you want to do, regardless of whether it's an academic environment or some kind of applied environment. A little bit about me. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I've been at my school, Bentley, now since 1999. I'm the chair of the sociology department. I'm also a member of the information design and corporate communication department, where I teach a graduate level course on ethnography for experience design. It's part of our nationally recognized program in user experience, our Master's of Science degree program. I also do 2-day training programs in ethnography for experience design, as well as qualitative data analysis. And I mentioned those things because I regularly have the opportunity to interface with people who are in business of some kind or working in business or organizations. And the idea of communicating with them in terms that they understand, not in terms that I was trained in, really has been the underlying factor going on. Oh, are the slides not showing up right now? Let me do this real quick. Let me do a quick share. Let me stop sharing and reshare it. Thanks for telling me that. And let me go right here. Are people seeing the About the Presenter slide right now? Perfect, thank you. I apologize for that. Technology, how does it work, right? Thanks for pointing that out. And I've also done a range of work in analyzing police interrogations, looking at the integration of electronic health record systems with physicians, and the study of a variety of different professions, such as medical transcription and globally distributed software development teams. I've also provided my LinkedIn address, where I tend to be pretty active, and my 2 Twitter handles, both my personal one and my business one. So now we're on the ethnoanalytics slide. Can everyone see that okay? Excellent. Now we're off and running. So my consultancy, where you can find myself at ethno-analytics.com, the tagline that I provided is translating complexity into integrated experience design. And this wasn't the first tagline that I developed. I actually had to talk with a lot of different consultants that I know in trying to refine the message. And I'm not quite sure yet it's completely refined where I want it. But what I tried to do, and this is one of the challenges that I would put out to everybody with their branding, is can you describe what it is that you do, or in concrete and practical features in terms, in 1 sentence, or 15 words or 2 sentences. One of the things we'll be talking about is how do you communicate what it is you know how to do in terms that people can understand. And without getting into the weeds of what is experience design and integrated experience design, it's a way when I communicate to people who do user experience or customer experience or patient experience, it's a way of communicating in terms that they understand experience design with my own unique angle, integrated experience design, which leverages what I think is sociology's greatest asset, which is our ability to see things from a systems perspective and then see how things relate to one another, this idea of a social network. And so rather than replicate what everyone else does, I do customer experience work, I try to find a message that both resonated with people and was unique to me to drive and add value in terms of how they would see me as being an essential part of solving their problem. So the idea of taking complexity and making it manageable is one of the things that a lot of companies have talked with me about, is that we have so much information now in the age of information technology, of data analytics. We have so much information that we don't know what to do with it. And so I identified that as a niche market in which I could try to enter in and really describe how I can make their lives easier. And this will be one of the key features going forward throughout, is how do we make people's lives easier by virtue of our skills, our training, our theoretical foundation, our methodological skill set. And I do want to start out, we should be moving on to the slide right now called the open house problem. And this is a picture from an open house at my school. Like many of you who might be in academia, once a year, maybe twice a year, you're asked to go man a table at an open house for prospective students. And students will come through with their families and ask you about your major or your programs. And we're a little unique at Bentley in that we don't have a sociology major. And also we don't really have a sociology program to speak of. We have a minor in sociology, but that's about it. So invariably what happens is I'm at my table and I get 2 kinds of questions. The first question is, where's the bathroom? Always comes up. The second question, and I'm not joking about that, literally people always ask me, where's the bathroom? And the second question is, what does sociology have to do with business? Why is there a sociology department at a business school? And it provides an interesting opportunity to really think about what is it that we do that would make sense for people. And I'll get to how I answer that question in a second, but it really does get to this problem. No one knows what sociology is, or worse, what they think they know is so far away from what it is that we do that then we have to re-educate. I personally would much rather have it that the person knows nothing about sociology and I can start with a clean slate versus having to go in and say, no, sociology isn't social work. No, sociology isn't socialism. And I'm sure many of you have had those kinds of responses, and we could list a lot more. Sociology is X or sociology is Y. And part of this, I would say a big part of this, has to do with what I call sociology's self-imposed irrelevance. And oh, you're seeing both slides? That's okay. I don't care if you see the next slide too. As long as you can see right now, the sociology's self-imposed irrelevance. Let me just try this real quick. There we go. Now we should be all set with the right share. Thank you for pointing that out to me. This idea of sociology's self-imposed irrelevance. And it's a generations long ago decision to target only a narrow market segment of what is sociology. Okay? And what I mean by that is this. When people talk about what is sociology, those who are primarily doing the definition of it for others are academics. So it's not a surprise that it's primarily defined in academic terms. But here's a news flash for everybody, right? The vast majority of those who major in sociology never become academics, right? Yet it's what defines what sociology is for people. And so all people think we do is do research, teach college classes, and publish papers in academic journals, often using terminology and concepts that no one else can understand other than ourselves. And sometimes not even we can understand what we're saying to each other. If you've ever been to a sociology conference and been in a room where people are talking about something and you have no idea what you're talking about, then you know what I mean by that. And the question then becomes, how do we better articulate sociology so that its relevance is seen by a broader cross-section of people other than ourselves? We can sit around with one another and talk about how sociology is relevant, but that's not really the problem. The problem is no one else either knows what sociology is or does not see it as relevant. And then that becomes a greater problem if you want to get a job outside of academia, because then how do you educate people on what it is that you do? And one of the key points to keep in mind here about branding is value is about perception and not calculation. And as sociologists, we know this. We know W.I. Thomas, if people perceive things as real, then they'll be real in their consequences. We know perception is a large part of what drives value. It's it's not supply and demand per se. It's behavioral economics. It's the social perception of how valuable something is. And then it becomes incumbent on us to actively create that perception of value in people's minds. In order to do that, we have to speak in terms that they will understand about topics that are important to them and demonstrate that you can make their lives better by solving the challenges that they're facing using sociology. And when I separate between different levels of sociology, I define it in the following ways. We had this problem in the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology. People would say to us, what is applied sociology and what is clinical sociology? And we didn't have an easy, quick answer for that. I mean, there's been a lot of information written about this. There's books written about it. I just came from a meeting today where, I said to somebody, no one knows what it is that this institute in our university does. And the response was, well, we write a report. It's out there. All people have to do is read it. Well, guess what? They're not going to read your report. And so do you either blame people for not reading what it is that you wrote, or do you look at yourselves and think about how do we better brand and market and communicate what it is that we do in terms that they're willing to digest? Okay. It's not just about, put it out there, and then if no one looks at it, then it's their fault. It actually becomes our problem, whether it's their fault or not. And so what I've tried to do is articulate different levels of sociology to really clarify in people's minds what is applied sociology and what is clinical sociology. So foundational sociology, I would define as using theories, concepts, and methods of sociology to study topics with the primary audience being academic outlets. And for those of us who are in academia, going to promotion and tenure, trying to land an academic job, this is primarily how we're measured. This is primarily how we define ourselves. We do research, we use theory, we write papers, we try to get it published in peer-reviewed outlets. Perhaps we look at ranked peer-reviewed outlets and try to target higher level outlets versus lower level ones. We try to get book contracts. That's the academic part of our jobs. However, it's only one part of our job. There's also applied sociology, and I just define applied sociology simply as, and I say I apply, I'm just drawing on the work that's already been done and trying to retranslate it in terms that a broader audience can understand. Using the theories, concepts, and methods of sociology to study topics and increase understanding of those topics with the primary audience being non-academic clients. By clients, I mean anybody who's engaging you to help them understand challenges they're facing, whether it be a business, a community organization, a nonprofit organization, a neighborhood group, whatever, right? Or people that you're talking to at a party. If they're trying to engage you in understanding what the challenges they're facing really are all about, and you're applying sociology to better inform them, I would call that applied sociology. We're increasing understanding using those theories, methods, and concepts that we learned to further that understanding. And then we get to clinical sociology. And when I say I'm a certified clinical sociologist, that's a certification given through the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology, where my work was evaluated by a panel of experts to have satisfied the requirements for doing clinical work. And by clinical work, it's not work in healthcare, even though I do work in healthcare. That's not what it means. Clinical is about treatment. And it's about using theories, concepts, and methods of sociology to study topics and increase understanding in order to design solutions. That's treatment. We're creating interventions with the primary audience being non-academic clients. And so you think back, to a medical model that a foundational doctor might be someone who does only lab work, right? They only do work in the lab doing research on diseases or on conditions, and they publish in the Journal of the American Medical Association or New England Journal of Medicine, and they communicate to other physicians primarily in ways that lay people wouldn't understand. Then you think about a doctor talking to a patient and communicating what's wrong with that patient in terms of patient can understand, but without providing a treatment. Now, clinical medicine goes to, like clinical social work or clinical psychology, goes to treatment. And just like clinical sociology goes to treatment. And the treatment involves designing solutions based on our understanding that was arrived through our theories, concepts, and methods. And I might just shorthand that in terms of my branding for people to say, I'm a design sociologist. And they say, what does that mean? I create interventions and strategies to help clients solve their most pressing challenges using a systems-based perspective. Bam, one sentence, this is what I do in terms that they can understand, that also differentiates me from other people by virtue of my sociological degree. And this gets us back to the open house problem. And one of the things I did was I found a quote by a gentleman named Simon Sinek, who's an author, consultant, and thought leader that I'll refer back to in a little bit. He has a quote, 100% of people are customers. 100% of customers are people. 100% of employees are people. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. So then I created the tagline, study sociology, understand people, the arts and sciences at Bentley University. And I created this image and I put it on a regular piece of paper and I photocopied about 50 copies and brought them to the open house. And I had a number of people come up to me, ask me, where's the bathroom? I showed them where the bathroom was. And then I had a number of people say, what does sociology have to do with business? And I handed them that piece of paper and I said, just read this first. Then they read it and then they said, okay, I understand now. And then we had a conversation around it. We understand people. And if doing business is about understanding people, to do business well, you need to be a sociologist. You need to have sociology. you need to have a sociological foundation to understand the ever-changing and emergent dynamics that are impacting and shaping their customers, their product, their client base, etc. When I communicated in those terms, very short, very crisp, very concise, it resonated. And I found that to be a very, very effective strategy. So in terms of steps in creating your brand, I'm not by no means an expert in this, even though I'm doing the webinar, but it's something I've actively had to wrestle with because, again, this is not something I was trained in as a graduate student. You know, I never had a class in how to brand yourself as a sociologist. And I certainly wasn't taught how to write reports for non-academic audiences. It's something that I had to learn by virtue of being at a business school. And so I tried to break this down into 8 different steps that I'll go through step by step. And if there's any questions along the way, by all means, feel free to post those. So decide on the area you want to work, figure out what problems or challenges those people face, translate what you know how to do to fit those needs, develop a presence, and more specifically an online presence, infuse your values into your work, create content related to that space, aiming for omnichannel distribution across a variety of different social media channels and other kinds of print channels potentially, depending upon your audience. Network at events that are related to those in that space. Continually refine that message till you find something that resonates. And this is a highly iterative process. And this is something that, you know, I've had to do over and over again, is constantly develop content, put it out there in the world, ask people if it resonates, look at their feedback, look at their reaction, and then go back and redo it all over again. And marketing and branding is ultimately about refining that message, because the needs of your people that you're trying to reach are going to change. The environment in which they exist is going to change. And as a result, you need to also be able to change that messaging to fit whatever fits them. One of the things I looked over this summer, listened to on tape, and you know I'm old because I said on tape, was a book by Donald Miller called Building a Story Brand. Clarify your message so customers will listen. And he likewise talks about 3 steps. What do you offer? How will it make one's life better? What do I need to get it? Right? What does the customer need to do to get your services, to get your input, to get you involved in their lives so that you can help them out? And I added a 4th, in terms that the client can understand. And this is one of the big challenges that we face because, again, I know there are some people in classes right now listening to this, not something that's often taught. And if your teachers are teaching you this, you're pretty lucky, because mine didn't. We're primarily drilled on how to write in academic terms for academic audiences. And there's a purpose and a utility in that. But if that's all we learn, we're really narrowly focused. And so that in terms clients can understand becomes a really, really vital part. And in going through these things step by step, first step, what kind of work do you want to do? And this is where, as undergraduates, as graduate students, even as adjuncts who aren't able to find, you know, stable long-term employment, or academics who are looking to do more consulting work or more applied work of some kind, what kind of work do you want to do? What is your narrow focus? And one of the things that we'll talk about is one of the kisses of death could be, well, I can do anything. When you tell someone you can do anything, it really translates in their mind that you really don't know what you can do. And they don't need you to do anything. They need you to do a particular thing well to make their lives better. And so it goes beyond, you know, knowing what you know how to do, but you need to turn that into what you can do. I was talking with one of our adjuncts here one time, and he was struggling with finding a job, and his dissertation was on, you know, studying conflict between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. And he said to me, well, I don't know how to translate that. No company's looking for somebody who has expertise in this area. That's what he knows. I said, what you know how to do is conflict resolution and mediation, because you studied that thing. And he has, you know, he has literature reviews on conflict resolution and mediation. And he's like, yeah, but I don't know how to do that. And I said, well, number one, if you don't, then there are easy steps that we'll talk about here to fill that gap. But number two, you probably do. You probably know how to do it as well as many people who claim knowledge in this space. And so you might know theory and methods, but can you do those theory and methods in ways that make sense? And that has to do with identifying what skills people need. Typically, you find this list of sociological skills on a lot of department web pages around what people learn in a major. You'll see critical thinking, you'll see communication, analytical skills, cross-cultural skills, research skills, and interpersonal skills, and all that's really true. We have expertise in all these different areas. However, so what? A lot of people can claim access to these skills. Listing these skills says what skills you have, but not specifically what you can do with them in ways that matter to others. And I have a student right now who's doing a project looking at sociology department websites and what kinds of career paths they offer their majors. And very often it will say very abstract things of, our students, are trained in critical thinking, or sociology students know how to engage in critical thinking and can communicate to audiences. But there's no tangible next thing to it. And we have employed people in these companies doing this specific kinds of work using those critical thinking skills, those communication skills, those analytic skills. Again, getting away from the abstract into the concrete can help communicate to people in very, very real terms what you can do for them and what kind of problems you can address. We also need to focus on what challenges people face. And I don't know if people are familiar with this image, but it's a design thinking image. And for those not familiar with design thinking, it's a methodology that's used to create new kinds of products, new kinds of programs, new kinds of approaches. And maybe at some point we'll have a whole webinar on design thinking. But the first step in design thinking is empathize. Learn about the audience for whom you are designing by observation and interview. Who is my user? What matters to this person? And this is really, really critical. And this is a step that a lot of people often overlook. I just came out of a meeting today where we were talking about a certain student segment. And a lot of people were talking about things that they thought the students would want or the students needed. But from a faculty perspective, what we didn't do is go to ask the students. And so the first step is always going to the people with whom you want to engage and finding out what challenges do they face. And then figuring out in an ethical and honest way, can you help them meet those challenges? Rather than assuming what problems people face, it's better to first ask them. Focus on their needs and problems. Within that space, there's always opportunity to innovate and address problems beyond that. But at least in my experience, I've found that clients first want to know, can you solve the thing that they're looking at solving in very real and concrete terms? And then using the value add approach of saying, yes, I can look at that, I'm going to focus on that, and also here are these other things that we found that are really important that you didn't consider as well. Part of that challenge is translating what we know to that broader audience. And by translation, I mean, I just grab a definition here, a rendering from one language into another. And also a change to a different substance, form, or appearance, or conversion. And really, we're talking about converting sociological speak, how we've been trained to communicate, most of us, many of us, and translating that to a different language. And so using the W.E.B. Du Bois kind of idea of code switching, right? This idea of saying, I'm going to flip between one language into another. And I've actually found myself when I'm moving back and forth between talking with sociologists and talking with people in business, that I found myself using words in different company that neither understand. I have to remind myself, the group I'm speaking with. And the way you start to find out is like how you would find out for any language. You go and listen to the people who are using that language and you try to learn it. And especially non-academic communication. Figure that market segment that you're trying to tap into, that you want to do your work and that drives your passion. Figure out what your market sounds like. What books are they reading? What TED Talks are they listening to? What jargon do they use? What blog posts are they sharing? And when I do this, when I'm entering into a new market segment, I'm trying to connect with them, I treat this like an ethnographic study, and you are trying to understand the natives. And it's really no different. It's just an ethnography problem. It's just this idea of really figuring out the terms that they use so that you can sound like one of them, but not go completely native, still be able to retain that value of a sociologist. and communicate that sociological foundational understanding, theories, concepts, and methods, formulate that in terms that they can understand. And so I do a lot of reading books that you might find at the airport bookstore. These kinds of trade publications that come out that people talk about, did you read this or did you read that? You might want to go listen to TED Talks that are really popular, to be able to have that kind of language in your back pocket and drop those references, to start to incorporate that jargon, and see how they're constructing the blog post, which I'll come back to later as well. Because once you're able to do that, then you have to start branding out to that broader audience. And that includes developing a presence, and an online presence through a variety of channels, omnichannel. And I will tell you this, quite frankly, I didn't realize until maybe the last couple of years how important something like LinkedIn was, that people really do use this, especially at least in business, they use it all the time. And I was having a meeting with a client, not a client, but a consultant friend of mine. And she said to me, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I thought I was, way ahead of the game because I had a LinkedIn profile. And I said, oh yeah, what'd you think of it? And she just started shaking her head no, and just looking at me in a very harsh, judgmental manner, and said, we have a lot of work to do with that. And her first question is, who is this for? I know I did this, and a lot of academics will do this. Very often we rate LinkedIn profiles as if we're trying to communicate with other academics. And that's not where academics go to find academics, right? LinkedIn is a different kind of medium for a different kind of base, for a different kind of audience. And so I had to really look at different consultants that I know. I had to really look at their LinkedIn profiles. I looked at how they were using Twitter. I looked at how they were using Instagram. I created a blog space through my consulting website using Squarespace. You start to think about search engine optimization. One of the people I listen to and read quite a bit is a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, who talks a lot about social media branding and how to reach audiences using social media. Another book that I read over the summer, or listened to on my phone over the summer, was called The $100 Startup. And it goes into how do you start up a business with only $100 or less than $100. Because doing a website is pretty cheap to do, right? Doing a LinkedIn profile can be free unless you go premium, which I don't have. Twitter, free. Facebook, free. There's a lot of free elements out there. Now, there's the old saying, if something is free, then you're probably the product. Of course, there's always risks associated with using these social media engines because they're probably using your data for something. But if you're willing to make that trade-off, you're not necessarily running for office of some kind, you can use these different kinds of free mechanisms to really brand yourself in a way, and develop a social media presence that reflects the groups you are trying to reach, and build your own brand of expertise. Turn the content that you already create into products for a larger audience, which I'll talk about in a second. And something I started to do quite recently is taking things I already do, and as a professor, I'm always creating content, whether it be lectures or PowerPoints or writing papers, and turning in, changing that material for a different kind of audience through slightly modifying it. The fifth step, infuse value into your work. And one of the things that I think a lot, if not all of us, were drawn to sociology is become some strong sense of values. And going back to Simon Sinek, he had this book that I listened to over the summer, Start With Why. And he has this golden circle. Why do you do what you do? What's your purpose? How do you do what you do? And then what do you do? And I adopted this to a sociological golden circle, right? Why? For me, I have a passion for sociology to create change, right? This is why I went into sociology originally. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to improve people's lives in some kind of way. So that's my why. That's my driving North Star. How I do that is I translate theories, concepts, and methods for clients. And then what? I implementation of action for change. I have programs that I offer, training programs, professional development programs. I do qualitative data collection and analysis for clients to help them better develop a strategy, to help them better target market segments, to have them better develop new innovative products. I do the work that they're hesitant to do with the idea of not only making their lives better, but hopefully by developing better products, developing better customer experiences, employee experiences, helping all of those to exist within their client ecosystem. And those are some of those business keywords I'm using, client ecosystem, which is a term that's used quite frequently right now in business. And I don't see it as a, selling out of who I am as a sociologist. I see it as furthering that message, that meaning of being a sociologist by helping organizations see their employees as not just employees, but internal customers, by thinking about how when they standardize employee processes that can de-skill and devalue labor, going back to even, Braverman's work on de-skilling, and even taking a Marxist orientation in many ways of saying, no, your employees are really important people, and that to have them be more productive, it's important you treat them like autonomous agents who have their own internal value, and that you respect them for who they are. That's a growing message right now in employee experience, and you don't find many sociologists in that space. And so that's one example of how we can align our values with emerging spaces in business if we're able to communicate properly and effectively what it is that we do and how it fits with what companies are trying to achieve. Creating content becomes really important as well, because if all we're doing is talking to one another or talking to ourselves, then what good does that do? And the idea of creating content is actually pretty simple. And I have two examples here. The one on race and customer experience, I gave a presentation at ASA in Philadelphia over the summer in August, and I just recorded my talk and put it on my blog. That simple. And I don't know why that didn't dawn on me earlier to do, because of all the presentations I've ever done, I've never recorded myself and used that as content. I had a really horrible experience with Travelocity. I turned it into a blog analyzing it in terms of customer experience. And so the idea is to create content for the audiences you are trying to reach, using blogs, videos, posts, pictures like Instagram or Snapchat. Whatever method of communication they use to get their information, you should be looking to engage. And engage in terms that they can understand, while at the same time using your own special spin on it to really differentiate yourself from anybody else who's also playing in that space. Networking, obviously hugely important, but professional networking in those spaces that we might not typically belong. And by that I mean joining professional associations of those you want to reach. When I started doing work in customer experience, which is an area that I do consulting now, as well as research, I started going to customer experience professionals associations coffee meetups. I went to user experience group meetings. You can look on meetup.org, I think it is, or look at meetups. Look for social events, design sprints, hackathons, special interest groups, whatever. Most of the associations that you can think of have most of the professional groups that you can think of have professional associations. Find those professional associations. Do they have local chapters? What kind of events do they put on? And just show up. What I found is being the only sociologist in the room really makes me distinct and makes people want to talk to me, because I'm going to be adding something to that conversation that they don't usually hear. When I went to a Customer Experience Professionals Association group meeting, someone said, well, what's a sociologist doing here? What do you do? And I said, well, my dissertation research was in Arab-owned liquor stores, and I used conversation analysis to examine point of contact between customers and workers to design and develop better experiences. Bam, they're interested now. Conversation analysis, the method and theory that I used, linking to my dissertation research as a conversational hook to get them interested, and then demonstrating kinds of engagements that I can do to add value to challenges that they're likely facing at a social networking event that was put on for free by this association. And I'm always trying to refine and improve my skills as well, right? And I have this picture here because it's training. We're always trying to train. And this has been something that I had to do because, again, most of the research that I'm doing right now, I never was trained in as a PhD student or master's student or bachelor student. This is all new to me, but this is what I love about my job, is that I get to learn new stuff all the time. And so what you really need to do is start broadening, filling in those gaps. Broaden out your reading and listening list to fill the gaps of areas you are lacking. And that's why I was listening to StoryBrand. That's why I was listening to The $100 Startup. I was listening to Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuk. I was listening to Start With Why. I'm listening to a book now called The Trust Factor, which is laden with sociology everywhere, but they never refer to it. And that's one of the insanely frustrating things about being a sociologist. We see ourselves everywhere, but no one refers to us. And it can be really depressing. And this is why I think probably if you look at the liquor bill at ASA, it's likely high. But that's because we don't engage more broadly in terms that people can understand. And so by going out and finding those training opportunities, you can start to understand how to translate what it is you know how to do to those who are looking for solutions. So I mentioned the CXPA, the User Experience Professionals Association. There's a great organization called SCORE, Senior Citizens of Retired Executives. At the AACS meeting, we have SCORE executives who come and give free workshops to talk about how to start your own consulting, how to do social media branding, how to create a budget, how to do tax. How do you declare yourself as an S Corp or a LLC, sole proprietor LLC, or whatever kind of organization that you develop. A great organization called IDEO, out of Palo Alto, they have great free tools online for design thinking and human-centered design, and that you can just go online and take for free. And so there's a lot of great free opportunities that you can augment what you know as a sociologist and really branch out that skill set. Oh, I should also say on that last part, LinkedIn Learning. So if you join LinkedIn, there's actually a LinkedIn Learning, almost a LinkedIn University, that has a lot of free training modules available that you can go and take and better develop your skill set as well. And so in terms of the skills you need, where I think a lot of sociologists need to improve their skill set, your marketing and branding, which is I'm assuming why you're here right now. Working in design teams. I don't know about many people out there, maybe it's changed, but when I was going to graduate school, I never worked in any group projects. Primarily, I was working on individual research papers by myself, doing my own thing. I can tell you that at my business school where I teach, almost everything they do is group projects. And so being able to work in teams, I put down design teams because I do a lot of design work, that's a skill set that you both have to learn, but also I think you have. One of my advisors is a PhD student, used the term social brokering. That's something we're very good at usually as sociologists. We can occupy liminal spaces in between groups and bring people together because we can translate across broad stakeholder spaces, especially as ethnographers. And so working in design teams is an important skill. How do we communicate to non-academic audiences? And also networking and selling. And this is something that I'm bad at and a lot of sociologists are bad at. We're really bad at selling what it is we know how to do. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? We go through our academic careers being told how much we don't know. And we might go through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of a PhD program, only come out the other end with the sense that I really still don't know anything, right? I know something, but I really don't know much. And then when people ask us, well, how much would you charge me to help me out? We literally don't know what to say, and we feel bad putting a price tag on it. And I've had to take the step. Luckily, I've had a network of consultant friends of mine, and I've had to take the step of asking friends of mine, what should I ask for money? Because we always undervalue our knowledge, and we're taught to almost give what we know away for free. And that's good, and that's fine. But what ends up happening is if you're giving away what you know for free, people start seeing it as having value. And so one of the skill sets that I know I need to work on is this networking and selling piece, especially the selling and the pricing piece, to know what people will pay and expect to pay. Because guess what? You can value yourself too low, and they will assume that you know nothing about the thing that you're saying you know about. It's almost better to go too high, because then it makes it seem like that you know a lot. And at least in business, my experience has been they'll negotiate you down, but if you start too low, they just won't talk to you anymore and negotiate you up. People aren't looking for a value, they're looking for confidence. I will also say, put a plug in for AACS, join AACS. We are the only organization by and for applied and clinical sociologists. And whether going to our conference, which next year is going to be in Portland, Oregon in October, the conference theme is on the It's on the profession of sociological practice. And also coming up with a number of webinars we have going on. We have Karen Albright, who I know is on this call, is going to be doing a webinar in January on grantsmanship for qualitative and mixed methods. We have Jonathan White on how to do social entrepreneurship, not just study social entrepreneurship, but how to do social entrepreneurship. Eric Vinkhausen, who works at Nissan with the self-driving car, he'll talk about how you use ethnography to help design and program self-driving cars. A good friend of mine, Bob Moore, just published a book on using conversation analysis for designing and developing more conversational voice agents like an Alexa. And so here he is working at IBM, writing a book that's going to help, designers and coders and engineers leverage conversation analysis into voice agent design. And then Jeff Toussaint, who gave a half-day training program on managing diverse organizations, giving a webinar on how to leverage sociological understanding to communicate that to a broader audience. So I have everyone's email who signed on for this, and I'll make sure to keep you appraised of all that. I know we're running out of time, and I want to leave some time for some questions, but going back to the book Story Brand, he calls it the Grunt Test. Have a message that's so clear a caveman can understand it. And I can't stress that enough. That's why sometimes the fewer words, the better. If you have to go over one sentence, it might be too much. Not always, but it might be. And test out your messaging on your parents, on your non-sociologist friends, on people you meet on the subway, I don't know, anywhere. Just try to communicate what it is you know how to do, right, with your values that drives that passion in a way that resonates with the audiences you're trying to reach. And there's a lot of space to really move and evolve that, because I don't think we'd have much disagreement that sociology has a lot to offer a lot of people. And the reason why we haven't been looked upon more is because we have not been able to articulate it as well as we should. And by all of us being able to do that better, it helps everybody the next time we have a conversation about sociology, or the next time I'm at an open house, I don't have the open house problem, right? Because now people know what sociology is and what a sociologist can do. As I mentioned, this is part of our Applied You program, programs to help you turn your sociological imagination into applied and clinical impact. And we have our ACS Applied You channel, where we have videotapes from this last year's conference in Norfolk, Virginia. And we had asked a lot of people, why are you applied? And they talked about it. There's also my presidential address, which some of this was based. What's phase 2? Crafting a value proposition for applied and clinical sociology. All of that is there as well. And we'll be putting more free content online too as we get to it. And so we're at 12:50. I have enough time for questions or comments. And my emails, both my emails are there. If you'd like to reach out to me and ask me any questions, you're free to do so by either means. If you want more information about running this kind of branding workshop for your students at a regional association for your school, I'm happy to talk with you about that as well, about taking this show on the road, so to speak, and working with people in specific ways, right? Almost professional coaching around how do I turn what it is I know how to do as a person into applied and clinical sociology for a broader audience. So with that, I'll open it up. Are there any questions or comments for the last 10 minutes on this content, or anything I missed that people think I should do? There's a Zoom webinar chat box and also a question and answer. I saw Dan said that this may be unrelated, but I'm already seeing ways to reach potential sociology majors through the branding of the major. I love your presentation on race customer experience. And thanks, Dan. And if you go to my ethnoanalytics page under news, you'll see the presentation I gave. And if it's something that you think would resonate for your classes, by all means, let me know. And I'm happy to discuss with you, giving a small presentation to your classes as well, and talk about how the framework was something called the customer is always right unless the customer is black. And using membership categorization devices, which is ethnomethodological, with conversation analysis to look at how the negation of customer status was done in these highly contentious interactions. So again, it's very foundationally sociological, but then with a translational element of communicating it to a broader audience. So happy to talk about this in further detail. Any other questions? How specific, Karen Albright, hi Karen. How specific, narrow do you recommend focusing for substantive areas? It's a really good question. It's one I always wrestle with. And this is going to be the common refrain. It depends. It depends how particular the client need is. I'm doing a client engagement right now. It's a dental company that makes dental implants, and they really don't know much about their customers. So we're going out and doing qualitative interviews with their customers. I had to develop a sampling framework for them of what kind of, and they didn't know what sampling frame meant. So that's research 101. And then we developed questions, and I made sure I included questions that they wanted to know, the low-hanging fruit questions, but I also added questions that I would ask as an academic to dentists. So questions like, what made you become a dentist in the first place? How would you describe your identity as a dentist? What happens during the day that makes you question why you became a dentist? And these are more of those professional identity questions that might be part of any dissertation project, any academic research project. And then being able to take that general point of view, coupled with their specific focus of what they want to know, to deliver both answers to the questions they have right now, but also the potential for innovation spaces. And so in customer experience, I try to, right now at least, narrowly focus. I'm a qualitative methodological specialist. I also am a specialist in experience design integration to help align your experience design channels so that your organization is moving more quickly down the road. So it just really depends. You have to feel that out and test it out. And sometimes it's based upon asking people what kind of challenges are facing you right now, listening to them, and then feeding it back into them. What social media platforms do you find most productive, Cynthia? For me, at least, it's been LinkedIn. That's the one I'm most active on right now. My Twitter game is kind of weak. I need to up that. One of the challenges is that there's so many different channels and not enough time in the day. I've been trying to use a program called Buffer. There's other kinds of programs called like Tootsuite, where if this, then that, where it allows you to post to multiple outlets at once. So you don't have to repost things over and over again. One of the things I try to do on an almost daily basis, although I've slipped because I've been really busy, is I find articles through my Smart News app, and I find articles that are related to my area of branding, customer experience, user experience, things like that. And I find something that's sociological in nature, and I post it on LinkedIn and my Twitter feed, but with a 1-line or 2-line caption that puts the sociological spin on it. And you'll find a lot of LinkedIn is not people just posting original content, it's people reposting other content. And so I would say those are two spaces. An emerging space, which is going to be really interesting to see, are voice agents, where people get quick minute sound bites. So one of the recommendations I've heard and read about was, create sound bites that take long enough for a person to brush his or her teeth. So can you, in 3 minutes, translate something that's happening in the news right now using sociological insights that people could reference through Alexa or through their Google Voice app? So if people have their phones with them all the time, can they access that information? Can they access you and your brand through those voice channels as well? But that's something I'm still kind of play with. I still have to up my game in those areas. So I can't tell you how it's worked out, but that's where things are going to be going. People reading less and listening more. And so, and not for 45 minutes, but in these quick sound bites, this modularized content. And I will say that I was approached to teach an online course for our MBA on employee experience. And one of the things that I said in response was I'd be happy to teach it, but I want to be able to modularize that content, that class content, into smaller, 5-minute soundbite increments that I can put through my LinkedIn channels and other channels for broader distribution to further my brand. So again, Omnichannel. I'm teaching the course for MBA students asynchronously. But I also want to be able to take that content that I created and put it out to other audiences. It helps brand the school better, helps brand the program better, and it definitely helps brand me better. So looking for those more broader and diverse branding opportunities to really get your message out. And the recording will be located at the Applied You website. If you go on the YouTube, you should be able to type in AACS Applied You. Hopefully that link comes up. I was going to give you the whole link, but it had like a lot of characters in it and a lot of stuff, a lot of symbols. But I will tweet out that link to everybody whose email I have as well. Any other questions or comments that people have? And again, I wish I was the expert on this, but this is really a lot of reflection of what I had to go through. So hopefully for all of you undergraduates and graduate students and others out there trying to get down this path. And I will add, being applied or being academic is not an either or proposition. You can do both, and I do both. I'm an academic and I'm a clinical sociologist. What are the best ways for a young recent graduate to begin accessing the knowledge to translate their sociological skills? I would go to, number one, define where you want to go, what kind of areas you want to work in. If you're not quite sure, I'm happy to chat with you about that and do a little bit of advising. Number two, I would look at things like LinkedIn Learning. I would look at things like Professional Association free webinars, where all you have to do is just give them your email and you can have access to the webinars. I would look at TED Talks as well. And so those would be the primary areas. I would look at what kind of books people are reading in the spaces, like New York Times bestseller books, not academic books. I'm talking about the general audience books. And Jordan, I really couldn't tell you what that would mean unless I had a little bit more specific in terms of what areas you were willing to look. But if you reach out to me through my email, happy to have that conversation with you. Any other questions? And we still have 2 more minutes left. I will be sending out a survey to everybody who attended this today, asking you about your experience and how you found the content. I also be interested if you have any suggestions about topics for the upcoming months. We already have a number laid out. Doesn't mean we couldn't have more than one a month. I don't have one planned for December right now because we weren't quite sure if it would work with the holidays coming up. But if there's something that we could do, whether it be around what is customer experience, what is design thinking, what is experience design, happy to do so. Happy to provide that content for everybody, because the goal that we want to do is we want to make sure people get the content they need to help them on their sociological journey to really turn their sociological imagination into impactful action and change. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for attending the webinar today. I really appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, again, reach out to me. Join AACS if you want more information about that. I'm happy to get it out to you. And otherwise, hope you have a great day and hope to see you at another webinar. Take care, everybody. Bye.